In this video, I'll break down why Warlocks are the biggest winners at level 25 PvP in Season of Discovery, having become all but immortal, considering where they came from. Warlocks were fairly weak in low-level PvP until they got Death Coil, due to their lack of peels and therefore struggling to get off of fear before being burst down. In Season of Discovery, they come into consideration for survivalist god tier.
No! God, please, no!
With 2 broken OP permanent defensive runes, their survivability looks truly ridiculous for a non-healer, while their damage got a justified lift for every specialization. Let's dive in and break down why Warlocks have become so good. Let's start with the Warlock core spells, as every Warlock will be using these quite a bit. Of course, starting with Fear, a spammable CC with a rather short range at 20 yards and only being rank 1 at this level for a max 10 seconds. Then they have a strong consumable with Healthstone, Life Tap to convert health to mana, Soulstone for an extra life, and their damage over time spells with Corruption, where I recommend for every specialization to take 5 out of 5 in improved Corruption or an instant dot. They are the masters of mana and life economy, having both drain life and mana, and a couple of not so strong castable destruction spells with Shadowbolt and Immolate and Searing Pain. Warlocks should probably be using the Voidwalker for the massive absorption sacrifice shield. This is because the Warlocks are missing the seduction spell of the Succubus, and they won't get Fell Hunter until level 30. They also don't have Death Coil, and importantly, they also don't have Curse of Tongues until level 26. So moving into Affliction, which will have some very powerful runes, with Master Channeler converting their channeled drain life ability into a dot of 15 seconds, transferring around 25 health per second from the opponent to the Warlock. This does have a 15-second cooldown then. Metamorphosis, granting them 500% armor, improving their life tap, and making Searing Pain instant cast. As an alternative to Metamorphosis is Haunt, or a more offensive route, causing both instant damage and increasing dot damage by 20%. And this will heal for a significant amount after 12 seconds then. For the last rune, Demonic Grace looks most impactful, granting you 30% dodge and 30% chance to crit when you're spamming Searing Pain. In terms of talents, they get Amplified Curse for a strong Agony, while they get improved mana economy with improved life tap. Then they can get 1 out of 2 talents in Nightfall, giving them a 2% chance on every life drain corruption proc to get an instant Shadowball cast. Pros and cons for Affliction. So Master Channel and Metamorphosis looks both like the most broken defensive runes for PvP, with Life Drain becoming 5 times more powerful than Siphon Life will be at level 30. It just seems ridiculous, while they become incredibly tanky against physical damage with Metamorphosis, and then will be granted the option to just keep spamming Searing Pain beyond their dots. If it wasn't for the fact that Warlocks don't do too much damage at this level, without much spell damage for their dots, this would seem way too strong. If you then combine this with a Voidwalker Sacrifice, the Demonic Grace rune, and a Healthstone, they look incredibly tanky. Life Drain as a dot will double up as a very good damage ability now, making Affliction Warlock an easy A tier, and extremely good at 1v1 I think. If you want to be more offensive, you can go Haunt instead of Metamorphosis, which will add a lot of damage. The main reason why they are not S tier is their lack of mobility and their susceptibility to be dispelled, and the difficulty with which they will have getting off fears with the 20-yard max range and added interrupts to the game. Also, the lack of spell damage available at this level make their damage slightly less impressive than other bursty classes. Where some classes can dish out 500 damage in 2 globals, Affliction Locks will need something like 10 seconds with full dots for that to happen. And they still do miss Death Coil quite a bit for peeling. So most of these issues get improved later on, which makes it likely that Affliction Warlock could easily go up to S tier. But if you want to solo play, this specialization is really something to consider. Moving on to Demonology. They basically use the same runes and spells as Affliction. They just get more absorption from their Voidwalker, they get a bit more stamina, and they get Fell Domination, making them able to summon another Voidwalker significantly faster and cheaper. The pros and cons of this, to be fair, it's quite similar, just a bit more defensive, making it probably a little bit stronger 1v1, as if they needed that, but making them less offensive, missing hit, life tap economy, and a small damage cooldown. Because you don't really want to be void sacking your pet all the time, if you can avoid it, as it still takes a lot of time to summon it, and Fell Domination is a very long cooldown. For me, this makes Demonology still the A tier, but slightly lower down the rank. While in particularly when you get to level 50, this could be the go-to 1v1 specialization, when you get access to both Soul Link and improved Corruption. Lastly, Destruction. They play fairly differently, as this specialization doesn't make much sense without Chaos Bolt, which means you cannot get Metamorphosis for tanking. You can combine that with Master Channeler for a strong heal every second. Alternatively, for raid PvP, you can use the rather crazy looking Shadowbolt volley, but you really need people to be grouping up for that to make a lot of sense. And you could add to that Demonic Tactics for 10% crit on those Shadowbolt volleys. Then you're probably going to want Incinerate to give you a big 25% fire buff for your Chaos Bolt or Immolate. While the best thing about the destruction talents is of course that you get Shadow Burn as either a finisher or just a instant burst damage. Beyond that, in terms of talents, Bane is very useful to make Immolate and Shadow Bolt much easier to cast. Destruction's pros and cons, this is much more the glass cannon type of play. With them, however, still being able to take Master Channeler for a big healing over time. If this rune is as good as I predict, this is what I would recommend. Destruction becomes a lot better later on when you get Succubus with its Seduction and Death Coil to set up casts, as you are susceptible to be interrupted a lot here. And there's a lot of setup with Destruction. To get the maximum value out of your Chaos Bolt, you will have to then hardcast and Incinerate before you hardcast the Chaos Bolt. That's quite easy to interrupt, with both of those spells being more than 2-second casts. Destruction also becomes a lot better when they can get access to some crit later on and take use of Ruin for additional crit damage. Destruction will really suffer when any melee are sitting on them, since everybody now basically have an interrupt. The best you can say about the scenario is that at least they have both a Shadow and a Fire School to cast when the other school is locked out. Without Metamorphosis, Stamina, and improved Health Stone, they will really lack in defensives. I think because of the lack of mobility, defensives, or peels, Destruction will really only work for group PvP, but they're probably very strong in group PvP with significant burst, and that's why I put them in B tier. So that was my Warlock deep dive. You will have a really good time both solo and in groups as Warlock. You can check out my Mage and Priest guide right here. If you like these deep dives, please consider liking the video. It helps a new YouTuber out a lot to get started, and hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date on my upcoming Season of Discovery content.